Namaste, everyone. It's good to get started. So, today I have the good fortune and also the challenge, actually, of talking of a topic which is very close to my heart. And I would go about reading and seeking spiritual advice on the matter. And I came upon the readings of the Mother from the book, The Words of Long Ago. So today's talk is based on her writings of 14th May 1912. And the topic is really, how can we make our purpose or our passion, our occupation? And in that topic or in that line, we have a whole host of questions. Is it possible? Is it worth it? Isn't an occupation something that we do to just earn a living? And isn't passion something that we follow for the happiness of our heart and something that we do for our own joy? And is it feasible in the current realities of the world to actually try and align the two? And I would like to start with sharing a little bit about what is our conventional notion of vocation which has been going on, which we all know about, but just to set context. The past 50, 60 years, or even before, my previous generation or the generation before, we always looked at vocation as something that is usually related to employment, something with which we can draw a salary or earn a living, earn a decent living. And it should be something usually respectable in society, gives us a certain degree of respect, and so on and so forth. And it was a reasonably good definition, a reasonably good working that happened some time back. So most of us would strive for jobs that give us security, that we can do, and which we would do probably from 9 in the morning to 5 in the evening. And then we would have time, leisure time, to follow our own activities, spend time with our friends, maybe follow our talents or pursuits. Now, as time changed and as things became more competitive, the 9 to 5 just became on paper, and what we have is 12 to 15-hour work days by and large. The stress at the workplace has increased to a point where in almost every minute we are trying to see, are we productive? Have we created value? And value is usually return on investment, or the money, or are the bottom lines of the company increasing? So work has been something wherein we are focused on about 12 to 15 hours in a day, and probably even in our vacations, even on Saturdays and Sundays. And that is the current situation for a large part of us. And this is the reality. So what happens in this reality? We don't have time for our talents. We don't have time for our leisure pursuits. And that initial conventional wisdom, which was like, let's earn a living and let's follow our talents or passion in our free time, we don't have free time. So what does this leave us with? It leaves us with a vocation or an occupation which may be very lucrative, which takes up a large part of our life, a large part of our energies. And when we spend a large part of our life and energies doing something which is not our passion, we end up feeling stressed or strained, and we end up having lifestyle challenges, health challenges. So if you see what was considered practical, that let's keep vocation and passion separate, over the years, because of the challenges in the competition, in the labor, in the globalization scenario, is becoming very impractical. It's becoming impractical to work 15, 16 hours in a day and not have time for what gives your soul happiness. And it's because of this reason that we have now a mental health situation happening across the world. And we have people, organizations, specialists, leaders saying that we have to look at wellness also. So when I look at this current challenge, and I was seeking that, are there ways in which we can align passion and work? And that's a large part of what some of us are trying to do. And it's becoming a murmur in the environment today. Can I do something which I really enjoy? And here when we realize that back in 1912, the mother has given us wise wisdom on this topic, which we've forgotten, and it's my effort, endeavor, to revisit this and revisit it in the current context and see if there is something that we can take back home practically, which will make sense for our working life and our own happiness. So she starts very beautifully saying that, what is my place in the universal work? This is the question. And for me, the operator word here is my. That sentence tells us that each of us here have a place or position in the universal work. We don't need to live robotic, repetitive lives, because if we are unique, then how can it be robotic? And with this sentence, I paused in this article, in this writing, and she says, we all have a role to fulfill, a work to accomplish, a place which we alone can occupy. This is the spiritual wisdom with which she said that it's our role, it's something that we can do alone, and that is our passion, and that is our purpose. So when we read this, and when we go through the humdrum of what we are going through every day, and what we see our friends, family, and relatives doing, and the stress, we say, but what am I doing? How do I even know what is my passion or purpose? Is there a way to know? Is it actually true that each of us can alone occupy a role in the world of work? And here she says very beautifully that we don't need to know our passion or purpose from day one, from the day we are born, or the day we start, or the day we even start working or thinking of what to do. So where do we start? We start where we are, with what we have, and do what we can. So if there is a way in which we can find out what gives us joy, and if we just sit back and observe, for each of us, we find happiness in things that don't pay us money. Money has nothing to do with it. We just derive joy from the joy of doing it. So if there is a way in which we can spend some time every day in that pursuit, then that would be our first step towards finding this passion of ours. And inherent in that is the wisdom that it's a journey, and you have to start. And when we start engaging with either that art or that talent or that service or that product or whoever we are engaging with, we build ourselves. We become stronger in that area. And just like when you're going on a journey of life, you stop at the next stop and you may say, okay, maybe this is what I can build it into. So she talks of something called a temporary occupation. And this is something that is conventionally not accepted, because we say, okay, you've taken a job, then 50, 60 years back, we'll say, stay in this job for the rest of your life and retire, because we want security, and that's why we are working. And back in 1912, she says, it can be a temporary occupation, something that expresses your innermost being as it is at that point in time. But just like everything evolves, when you engage with your work, you also evolve. And if it is an expression of who you are, you can't go wrong. Because as you travel, the next step will show itself, as long as we are open to that experience. So she also says it's an exceptional experience. We have to be open to the light, and there's a certain conversion that happens inside us in terms of our beliefs, our soul states, the way we operate, the way we think. And that is the journey of being able to converge passion and purpose into a vocation, the starting steps. Now, all this sounds very rosy. It sounds very hi-fi, and the biggest challenge I get with spirituality is people say, yeah, we can do that. 10 minutes in a day, 1 hour in a week, but the rest of the life, it has to come back to normal. This is not practical. But if we look at what's happening in the world of work today, that's also not practical or sustainable. And that's why we have to lean back to the writings and to gain our wisdom. So what she's really saying is that, firstly, is it possible for us to actually choose a vocation out of our own freedom, our own free will, which is not aligned to who we are, which is not an expression of us? Is it possible if you were to look at it naturally? Even if we were to put a bunch of kindergarten kids and watch them, you will see some children will naturally gravitate towards some gadgets. Some will move around to the playground. Some will pick up a paintbrush and smear themselves beautifully. Somebody else would be singing. Somebody else will be doing something else. Now, if that kindergarten is an observation point, you see that there is a vibration that each child has, and based on that, he or she is moving towards a certain form of entertainment or learning. In our current system, maybe apart from the first few years of kindergarten, we then don't have time to reflect and see as to what is it that's unique about ourselves, because we go through a system which is routinized, mechanized, common syllabus, common tests, and we become a class of 40. And it's somewhere there that we are not sure whether we actually have something unique in us. We start questioning it, or it just goes under the surface. It's a forgotten facet altogether. So, to give you another example, a very everyday example, I remember when my daughter was all of 3, she had this very fancy kitchen set. And this boy who was next door would come and play with her, and they would pick up everything. He would get his toys, she would have their toys. They'd have a gala time. And sometimes his mother would also drop in for a cup of tea. And she often noticed that they would play with the kitchen set, and they would role play serving people and cooking people things. And she came and told me, why do they keep playing with the kitchen set at your home? I don't want my boy to be playing with the kitchen set. And I paused. And she says, can you stop? But in my heart, it wasn't there to stop. And I just said, okay, they're less playing, let it be. Don't worry too much about it. But she did worry, and gradually his visits reduced. What was her inherent fear? That if he gets exposed to something like this, maybe he will become a chef, and it wasn't in her to make her son a chef. So, will that parent say that I did not curtail the freedom of my child to choose a profession? No. Did that parent do it consciously? No, not with awareness. But we are creatures of conditioning. And in our everyday lives, without our knowing, or sometimes with our complete knowledge, we remove certain aspects as possible choices or vocations for either ourselves or our offspring or our dependents. So the mother says very beautifully that this is an excerpt that I'd like to read. Those who freely set out to accomplish their own favorite work cannot, in my opinion, be on the wrong track. This work must surely be the expression of their own particular tendency. And the operative word is freedom. And how are we able to make sure that we are giving ourselves as well as the people we love around us that freedom? Because when we can do that, then we are able to imbibe this. Otherwise, what we think may be a passion may be an imposed statement which is coming from outside. In my recent work with a girl who's in her 20s, she's been set up to compete in the most difficult Indian exam. And she's been studying for a year or so. And she's not happy about it. So in her conversations, she tells me that, I was the most academically bright in my home. So it was taken for granted that if anybody would crack this exam, it had to be me. I never thought otherwise. I never challenged it. So from the day I was in grade 3 or 4, I just accepted that when I grow up, I have to give this exam and I have to take on this role. And she says, but I don't want to do it now. I never thought otherwise because everybody told me and I took it. But when I sit down and I see what it takes, I realize it's not me. And how do I do this role which is not me for the rest of my life? So here comes the dilemma that a lot of us face, that if we were to choose something that's us, or that is an expression of ourselves or our vibration, is it practical? Don't we have to just earn, a roof over our head and the bread and butter and everything that it takes? Because that's what a career is all about. It's the most operative word is how much money, what is the status, what is the security, will you have a good lifestyle, and so on. All of the other parameters that come in. And herein comes in a couple of examples that I would share, and these are everyday examples. Back in the 90s, when I was beginning my career, I had 2 friends who were trying to be photographers. One of them is a very established, reputed commercial photographer today. And the other one is very talented, exceptionally good, but does not feel that he's done as well commercially. And during those days, being a photographer was never seen as a commercially viable option. It was seen like a dream job. Now, both of these people started in the 90s in the same societal context. When I look back, I see equal passion, equal talent, equal dedication. Where I see a difference, and this I derived from the writings from the mother, and when I reflected back on what may have been different, is that one of them would get very defeated with the smallest of obstacles, and the other would just take the obstacles, pick up the learnings, and carry on. And this is the critical path. Because when you follow your passion, it's not necessary that everything will land on your plate easily. It may not. It may. And we also make the mistake that if we want to do something that we are passionate about, we want to make the biggest impact in the fastest time and be this extremely socially elevated, personality. I hear this a lot with teenagers. I want to stop climate change. I want to be the next Greta Thunberg, and so on and so forth. I want to do big. And the mother says very beautifully in one place that when we are choosing a vocation, we should not tell ourselves, what vocation can I find for myself in order to become great? On the contrary, we should tell ourselves, there must certainly be something I can do better than anyone else. Since each of us is a special mode of manifestation of the divine power, which in its essence is one in all. How many times do we choose a vocation based on this? And how many times do we choose a vocation based on greatness or social status? And when we choose a vocation, do we even pause and say, I'm here, I'm a manifestation, I have a purpose? And if I have that purpose, then can I pause and fulfill the reason why I came? It's at those starting places where I feel that we don't look within. And the mother gives very beautiful highlights of how we can do it. We look without. What vocation will make me great? The point is not whether the vocation will make us great. The point is, what is it that we are born to do, and can we do it every day with sincerity because of the joy it gives us, And whatever we get in return is a part of the reason why we were born, isn't it? So, what happens very often is that when we find that this is what we want to do, or we feel very passionately about something, we want to create impact, and that's part of our social conditioning. All of social media, all of media is looking at likes, engagement, how many views. What's the core message? Are you succeeding fast? Are you showing up for others? Are others acknowledging what you're doing? Where are you lost in all this? Where are we lost in all this? So she says that we can do great things, but we tend to overestimate our present strength and capacity and imagine that we are capable of immediately assuming a place and a role which we can honorably fulfill only after many years of methodical and persevering effort. And hence the key operative word here is that we need to invest ourselves in that task, in that activity, in that passion, and put in effort. Now, have we not heard people say, let's not put too much effort, we want quick returns? Do we see the disconnect? Because that's what's said. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's make it more productive. Let's work smarter and not harder. Do you realize where on an everyday basis the messages we are getting sometimes take us away from our goal, from our journey? And if all of this gave us joy and we were all mentally happy, I wouldn't have read this page, we wouldn't be having this session. But I have met a lot of very rich businessmen who've reached the best of magazines who don't seem to feel contented or happy inside. And it's a common accepted phenomenon now. And if you really look at it, it's because they haven't individually invested the effort and experienced the joy. So then, isn't it practical to actually put in the effort, experience the joy, and grow yourself to that soul state, rather than run with all the messages that are everywhere? And I think it's just a place, and she writes this in 1912, when a lot of the challenges of today hadn't been foreseen. We were still looking at 9-to-5 jobs, although much more security. But you see wisdom in what she's saying, wherein she says that we can't imagine ourselves to be very strong today to do what we have to do maybe 20 years, 30 years, 40 years later. Start today, do a little bit, build your stamina, build your strength, put in the effort, reap the joy of doing that. And as you grow, as you evolve, you will find the next place which will be your next vocation. And that is your journey of aligning your passion, finding your passion, and making it a vocation. And if you really see back to even the photographer example, which was not something that was considered very great, the person who did it with humility, and the person who felt that, okay, I've done this, is very good, I need a lot of social support now. Just that small change in vibration has taken them on very different paths. So, I think making your passion your vocation is like that Karam Yogi. It's a way of fulfilling your soul, aligning yourself, doing it for a greater good. And there are ways and means of doing it today. And rather than saying that this is not practical, is there a way we can sit down, reflect, and say, how can I make it happen for myself, for my own soul? Because There's only that much money and only that much food that I can consume, but my soul is hungry to express who I am. I'll end with a few words with which she beautifully says that as soon as we've abolished within us, even for a moment, all egoistic desires, all personal and selfish aims, we can surrender to this inner spontaneity, this deep inspiration which will enable us to commune with the living and progressive forces of the universe. The conception of our work will inevitably grow more perfect as we grow more perfect ourselves. But the work we perform must become always more and more joyful and spontaneous, like water welling from a pure spring. Thank you. I request Dr. Bijlani to come in and complete what I may have left. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vidya. I don't really have to complete what you have said. What you said was complete in itself. But maybe I can supplement a bit. And to start with, let me start with one of the first things that you said, that we have moved from the 9 to 5, 6-day-a-week culture to a 24-hour-a-day work, 7 days a week. So there's no time for leisure. Now, one way to look at it would be that, oh, what a tragedy. We have no time for leisure, for our hobbies. But there's a positive way of looking at it. And that's what indirectly you ended up doing. The positive way is we have to abolish that compartment, that division between work and hobbies. The work that we do can be our hobby, and our hobbies can be converted into our work. That is what we are striving to do, and that is one of the things that the changing times have taught us. So instead of having a limited amount of time for hobbies, we are in a hobby all the time. We are enjoying what we are doing, and that is what we can do best, and then we don't need another hobby. So in other words, you brought one more sort of expression to one of the two expressions which we hear a lot these days, the joy of loving and the joy of giving. To that you have added one more, the joy of doing. And the three can be fused. We express ourselves by loving. And how is love expressed? By giving what we can to those who need it. And when we give out of love, we are doing something. So the three can be fused. The joy of loving, the joy of giving, and the joy of doing. And what can be better than that? And if we also can make a living out of it, that is incidental, that is not the primary thing. But then how can we move towards it? Can we move towards it right from the day we start our career? Not necessarily. Because if we keep finding that perfect fit between our passion and our unique talents, which will make us do whatever we do with excellence, and then only we want to start our work, we may spend all our lives just searching for that type of work. So what we have to do is, as you again pointed out, and the mother has said in this, that you can start with a temporary occupation. The temporary occupation reasonably expresses well your inner being, your uniqueness, but it need not be your final inner calling. And for a person to discover through the temporary occupation the final calling, what we need is again important. We need to do it with conscientiousness, with perseverance, or one might say in the spirit of karma yoga, that is considering ourselves privileged to have been chosen as the instrument of the divine for doing that work. So if we do it in that spirit, then we are sure to find the inner calling. And that's important because one of the things which again you pointed out is becoming common is, let's work smarter, not harder. But in fact, there is no shortcut. Even the temporary occupation has to be handled in the spirit of karma yoga, has to be performed with full dedication and perseverance, with full sincerity. And then only we can discover the final calling. And one of the examples one can give is that of Sri Aurobindo himself. He was a teacher at Baroda, and an extremely loved and admired teacher. He was doing that work in the spirit of karma yoga, but then that was not his final calling. From there he moved to the freedom struggle, which was closer to his heart. And that did not involve, and that did not sort of imply any material progress. He was getting at Baroda what was those days a fabulous amount of about 500 rupees a month. From there he came down to be at the National College as the principal, where he was getting only about 1/3 the amount, because then he could be more conveniently get involved in the freedom struggle. But then within a year he realized that even that was not possible. He quit even that job at the National College and became more or less penniless to get involved in the freedom struggle. And then, because he kept doing what he felt he was really made for, what really gave him the greatest joy in spite of all the difficulties involved, he discovered his final calling, and that was through a divine intervention. When he was getting those signals that probably being in the freedom struggle was also not his final calling, he resisted. And he felt that how can this noble task of being involved in the freedom struggle be something that I'm not supposed to do? And when he could not break those bonds, that attachment, as he says in the Uttarpada speech, when he could not break that attachment to the freedom struggle that he had developed, then the divine broke it for him by sending him to jail for 1 year. And that is where he discovered in prison his final calling, which was to be a spiritual master. Now you might say that, well, that is an example of a spiritual master, and one who was destined to be a spiritual master, and we are not at that level. We are ordinary people. Well, I mean, ordinary people also can experience this. The speaker herself has experienced it. She worked in a school, she worked in a college, she has worked in the corporate sector, and it's after all those experiences and processing those experiences that she discovered what she was truly made for. And what she is doing now is counseling people, teenagers and their parents, on how to align their passion with their profession. So that is the type of work she is guiding people towards. She has discovered it. Ordinary people can do it. I myself sort of did the same. I was teaching at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, enjoying it. I was passionate about teaching. But all the same, that was perhaps not my final calling. And the call came more or less in an instant, in a flash, in the year 2001. I was at One Nivas in Nainital, attending the celebration of the 100th anniversary of Sri Aurobindo's visit to Nainital. He had visited Nainital with his wife in 1901. He was newly married then. And in 2001, we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of that event in our center in Nainital, and had gone for those celebrations. And there came in a flash one day, why do I have to go on spending so much time on administration and committee meetings and so on at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences? Teaching, which I really enjoy, takes just this much of it. This bit is what I am doing for teaching. And indirectly, now I am teaching a much larger number of people through my textbook. what I was teaching, I'd put down in the form of a textbook of physiology, and the students as well as their teachers were reading that book now when they went to the class. So I don't have to go on just to take a few classes a year. I don't have to go on sticking to this place. Why not quit and find more time for dissemination of spiritual wisdom? And although even earlier I had given this idea a serious consideration that after retirement I'll move to the ashram to do that type of work. But in 2000 came that flash, why do I have to wait even till retirement? I can take early retirement, and that's what I ended up doing. I quit about 7 years before I needed to have left that institution, and I never looked back. So one can discover one's inner calling in many ways, or it can happen to very ordinary people also. But the important thing is that for that, the temporary occupation should also be reasonably aligned with what we enjoy doing. That is one. And secondly, that we should handle that temporary occupation with full dedication and sincerity.